We'd like to welcome each and every individual to Voices of Integrity podcast. And today we're going through the history of the 530 grid. It's the coolest history. I mean, it's just the story behind it is just like, you got to be kidding. You can't make this stuff up. So, what was it? Looks like it was 15 years ago. So, probably 15 years ago that I was doing a coaching session with a client. And I asked him 1 to 10, how would you rate? So we didn't have the 530 grid in coaching and Action Vision coaching for the first, 18 years of coaching. So, anyways, I'm doing, asking at the end, at that time, we only did coaching once a month. Now we do it weekly, but at that time, once a month. And so I asked him, I said, 1 to 10, how would you rate your, the coaching session? And he said an 8. And I said, okay, what would it take to get to a 10? And he said, get everything you know and 1 8.5 by 11. And then I started laughing. And I'm like, okay. So he come back next month and, I go through the same exercise. 1 to 10, how'd you rate? He said an 8. And I said, um, what would it take to get to 10? He said, I told you last month. I said, you were serious? He's like, yeah, get everything you know into an 8.5 by 11. I'm like, what? So I went home that night and did this. So then, I don't know, it sat around for a few years, 3, 4, 5 years, and then I showed Tom Kuntz this. And he's like, holy cow, Mark. He's like, I've never seen anything like this. This is amazing. I said, yeah, it's pretty cool. He says, I don't think you understand what you have here. And I said, I think I do, but what do you think I have? He says, you have the DNA for business. I said, yeah, that makes sense. He said, this will work for a kid with a lemonade stand or a multi-trillion-dollar company. And he says, you got to take all these arrows out, though. You know,
The up and
this is
down.
what's that?
You mean the up and down arrows there?
The up and down and the
Oh,
side
what?
arrows.
I
Yeah,
see
all
those.
the arrows here. And, when I build something, it's really intentional. Like everything's there for a purpose. And I'm resisting that. I'm like, no, I can't take the arrows out. Like I'm thinking, I didn't say this to him. I mean, he's the president of the largest real estate franchise in the world, like 140,000 agents in 70 different countries. Like maybe I'd have listened to the guy, you know, and and I'm like, because the arrows, everything interconnects with everything. There should be more arrows. There should be an arrow from 1 to 30. Everything interconnects. Like it's like a system. It's like the body of a human being. Everything interconnects with everything else.
So what's the
But
purpose of the 530 grid, or what was it created for?
it's to be able to understand the complexity of business and simplify it. So when a business owner sees the 530 grid, not every business owner, but most business owners, especially if they're over 40, they'll immediately be drawn to it and say, what in the world? So I took out all the arrows. He said, oh, that's a lot better. He said, now explain it to me. I said, well, there's 4 different ways you can learn the 530 grid. And I showed him diagonal learning from the upper left to the lower right. And he's like, oh, so there's an order. And I said, yeah. He says, well, you need to put that in there. You need to have little numbers. And I'm thinking, you told me to take it out. Now you're telling me to put what? Like what? But again, I'm just like, just listen to him. Just do what he tells you to do. And so yeah, this is like the periodic, like they're in chemistry. In chemistry, you have the periodical chart for chemicals. This is the periodic chart for business.
So
Periodic
where,
charts for chemicals, a really interesting story. Holy cow. So this, took 45 years of my life 3 business degrees didn't hurt. Multiple businesses, coaching thousands of different businesses, speaking and all of that. All of this got sucked down into, this entire page here. The next dimension principle is another cool story. Like, you got to be kidding. So I was coaching a guy. It took me 18 and a half years to figure out how to test if somebody's coachable. And
How
so
did you determine that?
it's through this series of questions. So we have 3 minutes and then we have 11 minutes. So there's 3 minutes of questions and then there's 11 minutes of questions. So that's 14 minutes. And then there's 16 minutes. Then there's 16 minutes of questions that move somebody to the right solution. And so there was a guy that I went ahead and, he thought he was really coachable. He thought he was a 9 or 10. And he was like really a 1 or 2. And
Interesting.
and that happens for a fair amount, so people think they're really coachable. They're not. And so normally if somebody is below a 6, we won't bring them on as a client.
Is there different personalities that you found people are more coachable than others?
Not necessarily. It's not a personality thing. It's more like a character thing. And so it's where people who think they're smart, they think they've got it figured out. They're not going to do well in action vision coaching. So anyways, so I'm like, yeah, this guy's a 2 or 3, but he thinks he's a 10. And I'm like, well, Mark, what if he's right? I'm like, well, I know he's not. I'm like, what if he is right? So I seem to have the ability to take my mind in places that very few people can take their minds. It's not good or bad. It's for sure weird. But I can consider things that I know are false to be true. And well, what if it was true, Mark? And so I'm like, well, what if he's right and you're right, Mark? What if he is a 10, but he really is a 2? And I'm thinking, how is that possible? And that's when I came up with the next dimension. So in his world, so, we have a small pond on our property. A big fish in that pond is maybe this big. But you go in the river that's right beside our property, and that's not that big of a fish. It's a much bigger fish. You go into the ocean, even something this big or that big is small. So everything's perspective. And so,
Mhm.
so the dimensional, so the next dimension, which is one of the most significant of the 500 plus natural laws, um, came from me being humble, from me being open minded, from me being, well, what if he's right, Mark? And so on the 530 grid, the evolution of this whole thing is just insane. So there's 5 areas in every business. And then there's 30 boxes, 6 levels of proficiency. And then Tom and I went through and taught this. It takes 10 months to teach this. 10 months to freedom is what it's called. So Tom and I taught a course, 10 months to freedom, 3 times. So it took us 3 years to teach. We went through it one time, went through the same course again, and another time went through it again. The thing that's unusual about Tom is he just, like, he'll go through something 10 times with most people have a hard time going through something more than once. They're like, I got it. It's like, I don't know that you do. And so after 3 years of doing that, I'm like, there's something missing. So that's when we went ahead and discovered leadership. There's a leadership dimension and then a profitable partnership dimension too. So you get the 530 grid down, and then once you do that, then you enter into leadership. So yeah, there's a bunch of funky stuff. Like it's just so here, here it's like I really need to go through, and it's like, sports like the Olympics, where the Olympics weren't doing well public relations wise. Nobody really watched them. Nobody really
Mhm.
interested. They were not that big of a deal until one reporter just happened, by chance on something, and he interviewed and gave the backstory of one of the Olympians. And now all sports do that because it's not the sport that's the most interesting. What's the most interesting is the story behind the athlete.
That makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden it became this behemoth. Like it's just because they're telling stories and people can relate to stories and people feel connected to stories. And so this stuff here, each one of these things have a story. Like every one of these things have a story.
Crazy.
So yeah, it's like er, I don't have enough podcasts going to go, to go through all of these. And then the 500 natural laws, somebody years ago challenged me and said, Mark, um, what are they? And so then I said, okay. So there's this website out there that we don't even use anymore. Um, but it needs to be brought over. So it's crazy. And so here, I don't know, there's 100 or 150 of the natural laws. So these are all podcasts that I did with Tom Kuntz. So we do, we do one a week.
Wow.
But these are all in old technology. This is probably 6, 7 years ago, and we put it in SWF files versus YouTube. And so there's no way to convert an SWF. It's like how can you not convert SWFs? And why did we put them in SWFs if there's no way to convert them? It's kind of frustrating, but hey, it's life,
I don't even know what an SWF is.
right? I don't either. So there's all of these natural laws, and these natural laws all govern, everything. It's how people think. So there's history behind all this stuff that it's pretty crazy stuff.
On the
But
website, it does play the
yeah, it does
video.
play. It's just not very high quality.
If it doesn't transfer, you have to almost screen record it and then redo it.
Right. And I mean, yeah.
That's a
So,
lot.
well, so, too.